Hello, my name is Karina Ortiz Villa, and this is my presentation. It's called Can Men Be Oppressed as Men? Lessons from Intersectionality. This is co-authored with my faculty mentor, Dr. Katherine Gasdaglis from California State Polytechnic, University of Pomona, and in conjunction with McNair scholars. According to Tommy J. Curry, we have arrived at a time of gender theory in which black males are thought to be privileged, even as they are the overwhelming victims of various systems and bodies in society. Even in their victimization, their unjust incarceration, death, poverty, and absence in institutions of higher education, black males are thought to be a threat to themselves and society. As we know, men of color face systemic violence that target them as men of color. This is on the basis of their gender, and as their gender intersects with other facets of their identity and/or social location. So a little bit about this project. This project is going to tackle that question with intersectionality. So as we know, intersectionality has long been a target of critique because of its long history and no single origin point. Most recently, scholars have taken aim to intersectionality as being unable to fully encapsulate the oppression of subordinate men, namely men of color. Some recent objections include that intersectionality is meant to center discussions of oppression and injustice on the experience of black women. All other forms of intersectional discrimination flows in and through this experience. Another objection is that intersectionality perpetuates colonial logics inherent in gender categories of man and woman. And a third objection is that intersectionality theorizes the oppression of men of color as only racial oppression rather than their oppression being complicated by their gender as well. So we have two main goals for this project. One, we want to defend intersectionality against the objections that it cannot theorize the gendered oppression faced by men of color. And two, we want to provide evidence for modeling intersectionality itself as a methodological tool, as a heuristic device, an analytic lens, or a regulative principle. So our main argument is this. If we take seriously the implication of a methodological model of intersectionality, then we are able to understand that men can be oppressed qua men. First, we will argue that certain models of intersectionality do implicitly hold problematic assumptions that obscure the way certain men are targeted. Second, intersectionality is not itself a general theory of social groups that applies as a universal law to social reality, nor is it a metaphysical thesis about the essential nature of identity, discrimination, or oppression. Third, we will argue that intersectionality should be understood as a maxim or a principle that tells us how to go about looking into oppression and social reality in all its detail and specificity. And last, we will argue that modeling intersectionality itself in this methodological way is better equipped to handle complex and nuanced questions because it tells us how to look, not what we will find. So a little bit about a roadmap and how we will get there. First, I'm going to give a very brief background in intersectionality theory and its multiple iterations of intersectionality. Then I'm going to consider recent powerful objections to intersectionality's theory's ability to theorize the oppression of men of color faces men. So these are theoretically decentralized black men using colonizing logics and involving hegemonic gender categories. But for the purpose of this particular presentation, I will only be focusing on objection number 3. Then I will explain how intersectionality as a methodological tool or regulative principle avoids these worries. So a little bit brief background on intersectionality. It has a long history in Black and Latina feminist thought as a form of resistance against dominant frameworks that excluded third world women of color. Intersectionality aimed to illuminate the ways marginalized groups are systematically erased by these single-axis frameworks of discrimination, oppression, and identity. And what I mean by single-axis is that sexism was implicitly modeled as discrimination against white women. Racism was implicitly modeled as discrimination against black men. But the discrimination against black women was often ignored altogether or implicitly modeled as a sum of sexism and racism. So intersectionality tells us that we have to think about the interaction or the intersection of race and gender. So like the Combahee River Collective said in 1977, these are systems of oppression that are interlocking. Or as Anne Gary writes, each kind of oppression or privilege is shaped by and works through the others. So there are several types of intersectionalities. One is this metaphysical co-constitution thesis about social kinds, basically that race, class, and gender mutually construct one another. There's a normative co-constitution thesis in theories of oppression or structural intersectionality. There's a psychological and epistemic claims extending and complicating feminist standpoint theory, basically that the distinctive experiences of oppression of individuals who occupy these multiple disadvantaged social positions give them these privileged epistemic standpoints. And last, there's this methodological tool for social science and activism, basically where we consider interactions among different categories, a heuristic device, a knowledge project, a regulative principle, where we seek out the ways existing social categories or classifications mutually inform one another with the aim of resisting injustice. So as I said, in this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on objection 3. Basically, this objection says that intersectionality inherits exclusionary and essentialist concepts of gender from certain strands of feminist scholarship. Under intersectionality, for example, like Tommy J. Curry says, the disadvantages of Black men are conceptualized as consequences of the racial category, not the gendered subordinate male category, since male is thought of only as a designation of a privilege. So there are metaphysical assumptions about the nature of gender categories and how they are constructed through a certain way of thinking about oppression. What it means to be a man is to be dominant or privileged in certain ways relative to women. What it means to be a woman is to be subordinate in certain ways relative to men. And there are many influential theories of gender that endorse this position, even coming from Sally Haslinger. Yes, this bipolar model of oppression is too reductive. It treats oppression as two poles along a single social identity group axis. And sometimes oppression just doesn't work this way. Sometimes an outgroup or a third group benefits from targeting a variety of groups with marginalization, exploitation, or violence on the basis of gender in a variety of different ways. So what is going on here? Well, we start with important critical feminist work that notices real observed tendencies in the social world. Then we posit these injustices as universal and necessary social truths through a theoretical process of definition. And from there, it transforms these empirically grounded critical work into possibly essentialist and marginalizing social metaphysics. So this seems like a very devastating objection to intersectionality, but can intersectionality take these insights on board? And the answer is yes. If we view intersectionality as a methodological tool, then it avoids all of those worries. Intersectionality as a maxim would tell us how to go about looking into oppression and social reality in all its detail and specificity. It tells us how to look, not a theory of what we will find. So yes, men of color can be and are oppressed as men. They are targeted on the basis of gender in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different contexts. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation.